My parents always chose my sister over me, until she discovered I was worth $15 million. She lost control at Thanksgiving dinner, and Dad just sat there, speechless. You know, sometimes life hits you with a truth so big, so raw, that it shatters everything you thought you knew. And for me, that truth exploded right over the Thanksgiving turkey when my sister, Audrey, discovered I wasn't just her overlooked, average sibling, but a millionaire, 15 times over. What would you do if your family, who always saw you as second best, suddenly realized you were sitting on a fortune they never imagined? My name is Tanya, and for 32 years, I lived in my sister Audrey's shadow. No matter how hard I pushed, how much I achieved, I was always the lesser daughter in my parents' eyes. What they never knew, what they couldn't see, was that while they were busy praising my perfectly average sister, I was quietly building a $15 million fortune. And everything changed last Thanksgiving when that carefully guarded secret blew up. Let me take you back to where this whole story really begins. We grew up in suburban Boston, what looked like a picture-perfect, middle-class family from the outside. My dad, James, an insurance adjuster, and my mom, Diana, a third-grade teacher. We had a colonial house, a neat front yard, a swing set out back. But inside those walls, our family dynamic was anything but equal. From the moment Audrey was born, just 2 years before me, she was the golden child. I have these vivid memories, flipping through family photo albums. Audrey had entire books dedicated to her first steps, her first words, her first day of kindergarten, my milestones, maybe a page or two, tucked into the back of her albums, like an afterthought. The favoritism, it wasn't just glaring, it was insidious. It showed up in countless small ways that accumulated like tiny paper cuts over the years. When Audrey started dance lessons at 6, my parents were front row at every recital, flowers in hand, dozens of photos. Our living room transformed into a shrine for her dancing, with trophies and photos everywhere. Me, the summer I won the state science fair at 12, they skipped the ceremony. Audrey had a dance competition, you see. My certificate ended up in a drawer in my bedroom. Christmas mornings were the same heartbreaking story. Audrey unwrapped expensive, hand-picked gifts. I got practical items, generic presents that showed little thought. One year, it still stings, Audrey, 14, received a beautiful white gold necklace with a sapphire pendant, matching her eyes. Me, a set of educational books about famous scientists. Don't get me wrong, I loved science, but the message was crystal clear. Audrey deserved beautiful things. I should just focus on being practical. Even discipline was different. When Audrey broke curfew or lied about where she'd been, it was a gentle conversation about making better choices. When I did the same, grounded immediately, extra chores piled on. The double standard was so obvious. Our neighbors even commented on it. Our bedrooms told the story of parental investment. Audrey's room was redecorated every few years. Ballerinas, pop stars, a sophisticated teen retreat. My room? Same pale yellow walls. Same basic furniture from elementary school all the way through high school graduation. I asked to paint my walls dark blue in 8th grade. "We don't have money for unnecessary changes right now," my mother said. 2 weeks later, Audrey got a complete bedroom makeover. I learned early on that the path to any parental attention ran through academic achievement. Audrey was a solid B student, excelling socially. Me, I pushed myself for straight A's. Every academic club, every competition, late night studying. My parents would acknowledge these achievements with distracted nods or comments like, "That's nice, but don't you want to try something fun like your sister?" The constant dismissal, it could have broken my spirit. Instead, it forged something different in me. Fierce independence. By 13, I stopped looking for their approval. I became self-sufficient, cooking for myself, managing my own schedule, finding my own rides to academic competitions. I watched Audrey, still relying on her parents for everything well into her high school years. The one person who truly saw me was my grandmother, Elizabeth, my father's mother. Grandma Liz was sharp, no nonsense. An accountant, back when few women had careers. During my weekly visits, she'd ask detailed questions about my academic interests, listening intently. When I was 15, while baking cookies, she asked if I knew what compound interest was. I shook my head. She pulled out a pad of paper and showed me how money could grow over time. That day changed my life. Over the next 3 years, she taught me everything: investing, saving, building wealth. Lessons my parents never bothered to share with either of us. Your sister may be getting all the attention now, Grandma Liz told me once, but you are the one with the mind for success. Remember, true wealth isn't flashy. The richest people in the room are rarely the ones showing it off. My high school graduation should have been a triumph. Valedictorian, full scholarship to state university's prestigious business program. Giving my speech, I spotted my family. My father was filming, but I later found the video was mostly of Audrey reacting, not of me speaking. At my graduation party, my parents spent most of the time telling relatives about Audrey's acceptance to an expensive private college, despite her mediocre grades. My accomplishments. A brief aside, it's nice Tanya got that scholarship. She was always so practical. That night, I made a promise to myself. Someday, I would build a life so successful it would be impossible to ignore. But I wondered, by then, would I even want their recognition anymore? Audrey headed off to Westfield University, a private college costing over $40,000 a year. I enrolled at State on my full academic scholarship. The contrast was stark. They helped Audrey furnish her dorm with new everything: bedding, mini fridge, the latest laptop. They drove 6 hours, staying the weekend to settle her in. For my college move, my father dropped me off with 2 suitcases and a box of secondhand supplies. Well, you've always been independent. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Call if you absolutely need anything. He was back in the car within 20 minutes, rushing home to help my mother prepare a care package for Audrey, who'd been homesick after just 2 weeks. When I called home that first semester, my parents always seemed distracted, eager to tell me about Audrey's social life. When I mentioned my 4.0 GPA after midterms, my mother said, "That's nice, honey. Did I tell you Audrey got invited to join the best sorority on campus?" Financial disparities became even more apparent. My parents contributed nothing to my education, reminding me I had a scholarship whenever money came up. Meanwhile, they paid Audrey's full tuition and gave her a monthly allowance. I worked 3 jobs: campus coffee shop, library, tutoring. Despite that packed schedule, I maintained perfect grades and began to stand out in my business classes. Sophomore year, Professor Lambert, who taught financial analysis, asked me to stay after class. "Miss Warren," he said, "I've been teaching for 25 years, and I rarely see the kind of aptitude for financial markets that you possess. Have you considered where you want to take this talent?" That conversation was a major turning point. Professor Lambert became the mentor I'd always needed, introducing me to industry contacts, recommending me for competitive internships. The summer after junior year, I landed a position at Maxwell Investments, working directly under their chief strategy officer. While Audrey spent that summer backpacking through Europe on her parents' dime, I worked 60-hour weeks, absorbing everything about investment strategies and market analysis. During my senior year, Grandma Liz passed away unexpectedly. It devastated me in ways my parents couldn't understand. They saw her as just family. I had lost my champion, my mentor, the only person who had ever fully believed in my potential. A month after the funeral, a letter from Grandma Liz's attorney. She had left me $50,000, her entire life savings. My parents were shocked. They'd expected her modest estate to be divided equally. "You should consider sharing that with your sister," my father suggested over dinner. "Audrey is thinking about graduate school, and that money could really help her." I looked at him, incredulous. Did Grandma Liz leave this money to Audrey? No, but families should support each other, my mother chimed in. Your sister has expensive dreams, and you always manage just fine on your own. For the first time in my life, I flatly refused them. This is my inheritance from the one person who supported my goals, I said. I'm using it exactly as she would have wanted me to. And I did. Every penny of that inheritance became the seed money for what would eventually grow into my fortune. After graduation, I accepted a position at Blackstone Financial. My starting salary was modest by New York standards, but the growth opportunity was substantial. I lived in a tiny studio with 3 roommates, spent nothing on luxuries, and invested 50% of every paycheck. I developed a reputation for spotting opportunities others missed, researching emerging technologies and sustainable energy before they were trendy. By 26, I had saved enough to take a calculated risk. I left Blackstone and started my own investment firm, TWW Strategic Partners. The name was intentionally neutral, not broadcasting that a young woman was at the helm. My first major breakthrough came when I invested heavily in a woman-led biotech startup. When it was acquired the following year, my initial investment multiplied tenfold. By 27, my net worth crossed the $1 million threshold. No one in my family had any idea. I moved to a comfortable but not flashy apartment in New York and limited contact with my family to holidays and phone calls. During these interactions, they continued their lifelong pattern. Audrey, who bounced between marketing jobs with an average salary, was praised endlessly for her creativity and social connections. My career? Barely acknowledged. When it was, my mother would say things like, "It's nice you found stable work, though it sounds awfully boring." At family gatherings, relatives asked Audrey detailed questions about her life. Me, generic inquiries about dating. When I mentioned my company was doing well, the conversation quickly shifted back to Audrey, excited about planning a Bali trip our parents were partially funding, despite her being 30. I stopped trying to share my successes. Instead, I created a fictional version of my life for family consumption. A regular finance job, regular hours, regular salary. It was just easier than explaining the truth and watching their eyes glaze over. Or worse, having them suddenly develop an interest in my life only because of money. Over the next 5 years, TWW Strategic Partners grew from a one-woman operation to a boutique investment firm with 15 employees and over $200 million under management. By 30, my personal net worth reached $5 million. By 32, that number had tripled to $15 million. I owned a stunning Manhattan apartment overlooking Central Park, vacationed in exclusive resorts, could afford anything I wanted. Not that I spent lavishly. Grandma Liz's lessons about quiet wealth had stuck with me. Yet, to my family I remained just Tanya who worked in finance. I meticulously maintained this fiction. A separate phone for family calls. Never posted about my business success on social media. When visiting my parents, I drove a rented Toyota, not my Tesla. I wore simple clothing, no designer labels, hair and a ponytail, minimal makeup. All to reinforce the image of someone focused on work, not flash. I had multiple reasons for this elaborate deception. First, I feared if they knew my wealth, they'd immediately ask for money, not for themselves, but for Audrey. They'd always supported her financially. Second, and perhaps more importantly, I didn't want to be suddenly valued only for my money after being overlooked my entire life. What would it say about our relationship if financial success was what finally earned me the attention and approval I had been denied? The thought made me feel sick. Finally, years of emotional neglect had made me fiercely protective of my achievements. My success was mine alone, built without their support or encouragement. Some deep, wounded part of me just didn't want to share it with the people who had never believed in me. In New York, I lived an entirely different life. I sat on tech startup boards, was featured in business publications, attended exclusive industry events. I owned designer clothing and fine jewelry I never wore around family. I dated successful men who understood ambition and drive. My two lives never intersected, and I became adept at switching between them. Last Christmas was a perfect example. I flew home for 3 days, bringing modestly priced gifts, wearing simple jeans and sweaters. My parents gushed about Audrey's promotion to senior marketing manager, a position that likely paid less than my annual business travel expenses. "Isn't it wonderful?" my mother said, squeezing Audrey's hand. "And they gave her a $5,000 bonus." I nodded and smiled, not mentioning I donated 50 times that amount to a girls' coding initiative the previous week. My father asked about my work. I gave a vague answer, "Project's going well." He replied, "Well, as long as you're stable, that's what matters. Not everyone needs to climb the corporate ladder." I'd become so accustomed to this dynamic that it rarely bothered me anymore. Or so I told myself. But that changed when I met Michael, a successful architect with his own firm. Michael saw through my carefully constructed walls from our first date. After 3 months, he asked the question no one had bothered to ask before. "Why do you downplay your success around your family?" It caught me off guard. We were having dinner, and I'd just finished a phone call with my mother where I'd deflected questions with intentionally boring responses. "I don't downplay it," I said automatically. "They just aren't interested in finance." Michael gave me a knowing look. "Tanya, you're one of the most successful people I know. You manage hundreds of millions in assets. You've been profiled in Forbes. Yet you just told your mother you had a normal day at the office checking spreadsheets." When I didn't respond, he continued, more gently, "I'm not judging you. I'm just curious why you hide such a huge part of yourself from them." That night, I told Michael the full story of my childhood. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he said something that resonated deeply. Living 2 separate lives must be exhausting. At some point, don't you want to just be your whole self? His question stayed with me for weeks. As Thanksgiving approached, I made a decision. I wouldn't dramatically announce my wealth, but I would stop actively hiding it. I would bring Michael home. I would wear clothes I actually liked. I would answer questions about my work honestly if asked. As a small step, I bought my parents a new television. Not extravagant, but a significant upgrade from their 10-year-old set. A tiny fraction of what I could afford. Still, it was more expensive than my usual generic gifts, and I felt both nervous and excited. The drive from New York to Boston, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, filled me with familiar anxiety despite Michael's presence. Pulling onto my parents' street, I immediately noticed Audrey's new Audi in the driveway, a car I knew my parents had helped her finance. "Showtime," I muttered to Michael. The television, wrapped in tasteful silver paper, sat in the back seat. The moment we stepped through the door, the family dynamic established itself with painful predictability. My mother rushed past me to hug Michael, thrilled to meet my successful boyfriend. My father gave me a distracted pat on the shoulder before calling out, "Audrey, Tanya is here." Audrey swept into the room like she was making an entrance on stage. At 34, she still carried herself with the confident air of someone who had been told her whole life she was special. "Tanya!" she exclaimed, a quick hug that barely made contact. She turned immediately to Michael, assessing him with obvious approval. "So, you're the famous Michael. Mom says you're an architect." While Michael handled the introductions with grace, I glanced around the living room. New photos of Audrey and her husband, Brad, dominated the mantel, including several from their Hawaii vacation, an anniversary gift our parents had contributed to. I spotted exactly one photo of me, a 5-year-old graduation picture, tucked on a side table. Dinner that evening was a masterclass in subtle favoritism. My mother prepared all of Audrey's favorite foods, including the labor-intensive Swedish meatballs. When I offered to help, no need, honey. Audrey already set the table so beautifully. The conversation revolved entirely around Audrey's recent promotion. She waved her hands dramatically, describing her new office with a window view and her 2 junior marketers. "It's just such a validation, you know," she said, sipping her wine. "All those years of networking and relationship building are finally paying off. They specifically told me my people skills were why I got the position." My parents nodded enthusiastically. When Brad mentioned the raise was modest, my father immediately said, "Well, we can help out if you need to upgrade some things for your new position. First impressions matter in business." No one asked about my work until dessert. My mother turned to me. "And how's your job going, Tanya? Still doing the spreadsheet thing?" Before I could answer, Audrey jumped in. "She wouldn't know what to do with a promotion anyway," she laughed. "Remember how she always hated being the center of attention? She's happier behind a desk." Later that evening, Michael and I were assigned to the small guest room with the lumpy pull-out sofa. Audrey and Brad got the master guest suite. When I mentioned this to my mother, she seemed genuinely confused. "Audrey and Brad are used to a certain standard of living," she explained, "and you know your sister has back problems. Besides, you've always been less fussy about accommodations." That night, as we tried to get comfortable, Michael whispered, "Are they always like this?" "Actually, they're on better behavior because you're here," I replied, only half joking. The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, I overheard a conversation that confirmed nothing had changed. I was coming down the hallway, heard my name mentioned in the kitchen. I paused just out of sight. "I just don't understand why Tanya hasn't progressed more in her career," my mother was saying. "She was always so good at math and those analytical things." "Some people just don't have ambition," my father replied. "She's always been content with less, not like Audrey, always striving for more." Then I heard Audrey sigh dramatically. "I feel bad for her sometimes. And now she's brought this really successful guy home. I Googled him. You know, his architecture firm does huge projects. I give it 6 months before he realizes she's not at his level." I stood frozen. Their words cut deeper than they should have, given how often I'd heard similar sentiments. Michael found me there, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "Let's go for a walk." Outside, in the crisp November air, I finally let the tears fall. "It's been like this my whole life," I choked out. "Nothing I do is ever enough. And now they're pitying me because they think you're too successful for me." Michael stopped, turned to face me. "You know what I think? I think it's time they knew exactly who you're hiding." Later that afternoon, helping my mother prepare the meal, I took an unavoidable business call. One of our major investments was finalizing and my input was required. I stepped into the backyard for privacy, speaking confidently about million-dollar figures and strategy adjustments. I didn't realize Audrey had followed me until I ended the call and turned to find her standing by the back door, her expression suspicious. "Who was that?" she asked. Sounded pretty intense for someone who just does data entry or whatever. "Just work stuff," I said, trying to move past her. She blocked my path. "Since when do data analysts talk about investment, portfolios, and 7-figure returns? What's your job, actually?" Before I could formulate a response, my mother called us in to set the table. Audrey gave me a long, calculating look before turning away. But I knew the conversation wasn't over. My carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel, and I felt both terrified and strangely relieved. The final thread snapped when Michael, making casual conversation with Brad, mentioned our upcoming trip to Tokyo. "Tanya has a new client there," he explained, "but we're extending the trip to explore the city. I've never been, but Tanya goes a few times a year for work." I saw Audrey's head snap up from across the room, her eyes narrowing. This new information directly contradicted everything I'd told them about my modest career. As we moved to the dining room for Thanksgiving meal, I could feel the tension building like a thunderstorm. The room looked picture perfect, my mother's best tablecloth, the good china, a golden turkey surrounded by classic sides. My father said a brief grace, thanking God for family and abundance. Words that felt strangely prophetic given what was about to unfold. The first 15 minutes proceeded pleasantly enough, with comments about the moist turkey and reminiscences. My mother directed most questions to Audrey and Brad. Audrey just turned 34. Plenty of time still, my mother said, squeezing my sister's hand. But grandchildren would be such a blessing. No one mentioned I was 32 and might also be considering family planning. Michael caught my eye across the cranberry sauce, a reassuring smile. As initial hunger was satisfied, my father turned to Michael with genuine interest. So, tell us more about this architecture firm of yours. Your website looks impressive. What kind of projects do you typically handle? While Michael described a museum renovation, I slipped away to retrieve the television from the car. Returning, I placed the large package against the wall and rejoined the table. "What's that?" my mother asked, noticing the gift. "Just a little something for you and Dad," I said, trying to sound casual. "An early Christmas present, but I thought you might enjoy it for the holiday football games." When dinner wound down, I brought the package to my parents. They looked surprised. My gifts were typically small, practical items under $50. My father tore away the wrapping paper to reveal a 50-friended family, sharing a distorted version of events that cast me as a greedy, selfish sister. Cousins and aunts I barely spoke to started sending messages. "I've never asked you for money before," wrote my cousin Stephanie, whom I hadn't seen in 5 years. "But my son really wants to go to soccer camp this summer, and since you're obviously loaded—" I deleted the messages without responding. The people who actually knew me understood. The ones who only reached out when money was involved confirmed exactly why I'd kept my success private for so long. 6 months after the Thanksgiving meltdown, spring brought new growth, both in the natural world and in my personal life. The immediate aftermath had been painful, but the enforced honesty had ultimately created space for healing. I began seeing Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, a therapist specializing in family trauma. "Your success triggered a family system that was built on specific roles," she explained. "You were assigned the role of the self-sufficient, overlooked child. Audrey was the needy, celebrated child. Your parents were providers who focused resources where they perceived the greatest need. When you revealed your success, you shattered those roles, and the entire family system destabilized. Through therapy, I understood that while I couldn't change my past or my family's behavior, I could set clear boundaries. I drafted an email to my entire family outlining them. I would not discuss my finances. I would not provide funding for Audrey's lifestyle. And I would only participate in family gatherings where my achievements and personhood were respected equally to my sisters. The response varied dramatically. Audrey essentially cut contact, sending a final scathing message, accusing me of destroying the family. I blocked her number the same day, a decision that brought immediate relief. My relationship with my parents evolved into something more limited, but also more honest. We spoke every few weeks, carefully avoiding old triggers. My father made genuine efforts, asking thoughtful questions about my company. "I truly didn't understand what you were building," he told me during one call. "I just assumed when you said finance, you meant some entry-level position pushing papers. I'm sorry I never asked for details." My mother found the adjustment harder, frequently lamenting the rift with Audrey, occasionally suggesting a financial gift for me might help heal things. "Mom," I said firmly, my relationship with Audrey was broken long before money entered the picture. "I'm not using my resources to buy a fake sisterhood." After careful consideration, I did make one financial decision regarding my family. I established an educational trust fund for Audrey's children, my niece and nephew, that would cover their college expenses. The trust was structured so the money could only be used for education, with no possibility of Audrey accessing it. When I told my parents, my father expressed genuine gratitude. "That's incredibly generous, Tanya, especially given everything." I love those kids, I replied simply. Their future shouldn't be limited by adult conflicts. My relationship with Michael deepened throughout this upheaval. He had seen me at my most vulnerable and most powerful. 6 months after Thanksgiving, he proposed during a weekend trip, presenting a vintage emerald ring that couldn't have been more perfect. "Do you think we'll have kids someday?" he asked as we lay in bed that night. "I think so," I replied, surprised by how much I wanted that future with him. "But we'll do better than my parents did. We'll love each child for exactly who they are, not who needs us most." In many ways, the most profound healing came through building what Michael called my chosen family. My close friends, particularly those who had known about my success all along, provided the unconditional support I never found at home. We celebrated holidays, created new traditions, built connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or history. Perhaps the most unexpected development was my changing relationship with money itself. For years, my wealth had been a secret source of validation, concrete proof I'd succeeded despite my family's lack of faith. After the confrontation, I began to see it differently, not as a scorecard, but simply as a tool that provided security and options. I increased my philanthropic giving, focusing on organizations that supported young women in finance and technology. I mentored aspiring female entrepreneurs, sharing both knowledge and, in some cases, seed funding. The joy I found in helping others build their dreams far surpassed the hollow satisfaction of accumulating wealth in secret. By the time the next Thanksgiving approached, I had learned several profound lessons. First, honesty, while sometimes painful, is ultimately less exhausting than pretense. Living a double life had consumed enormous emotional energy. Second, money doesn't create character flaws, it reveals them. Those who always valued me continued to do so. Those who suddenly showed interest when they learned of my wealth had always been transactional. Third, and perhaps most importantly, I learned that my worth was never dependent on my family's recognition. I had spent decades seeking validation from people who were constitutionally unable to provide it. That recognition had to come from within, from knowing my own value, regardless of external affirmation. The journey wasn't over, of course. Family systems don't transform overnight, and old wounds don't heal completely in a matter of months. But I had found a path forward that honored both my past experiences and my future possibilities. I had stopped allowing myself to be defined by what my family couldn't give me, and started embracing what I could create for myself. I will always be the girl who grew up in her sister's shadow, but I also became the woman who stepped into her own light. And that's a story worth $15 million. So, tell me, have you ever had to confront family members about unequal treatment? Or perhaps felt like you had to hide a part of yourself to keep the peace? What would you have done if you were me in that dining room? I really want to hear your thoughts in the comments below.